teams to gather this information. So in 1920, our teachers, they were working on it as well in 1819, but they were creating trimester assessments. And what they're doing is they're coming up with these common assessments. So they were able to finish them last year and actually start putting them into place. So that was very exciting because that was a lot of hard work that those teacher teams put in for that. The grade level teams also set instructional goals and standards to focus on. We know during a school year, kids learn so many different things, but they really wanted to pinpoint the standards and skills that were going to be expectation for mastery. So they pinpointed those goals as well. Just like everyone, they really had to learn a lot more with Seesaw and Google and just the way they were utilizing the technology. The Zoom, they would even go to virtual sites. They were trying to do little field trips within the classroom, just using technology any way they can to keep the students engaged. Because as you know, as we all know nowadays, sitting on a screen for hours at a time is really tough. Our teams felt that their data review, RTI 504 meetings were efficient and organized. Teachers, our support staff, our students, they are resilient and flexible. Teachers, support staffs communicate, have a willingness to help one another. In our building alone, we went from 6 sections of each grade level to 10 sections of each grade level. So with all the new people, the amount of help that our existing staff is giving our new staff it's unbelievable. So I can't say enough about that. And we too, we had an end of the year drive-by parade. Actually, we went through all of the neighborhoods in Lockport and Homer Glen, and it was great just to say goodbye to our kids and to provide some closure for them. A couple of the things that started in 1920 or that we felt like we accomplished moved over to this year as well. Once again, the resiliency and flexibility, the teachers, the support staff, and the students. I mean, we were in school, then we're home, then we're back in school, and just that change of environment was a lot for everybody. The communication and the help, once again, as I talked about, keeping the students engaged with the technology. And our staff members really worked on activities that they developed and just had some really good conversations on how to meet the social emotional needs of our students, more so than ever. We've had Second Step for a few years, but I feel like they've really put some more things in place. All of our teachers have a daily check-in Google form to see how the students are doing. Some of them are doing it at the beginning and the end of the day. And that's just a heads up if a teacher needs to get involved and maybe pull that student into a breakout room to talk to them just to see if they can't, help them out before the school day starts. Collaboratively determine the priority standards. Now, I talked about last year how they were identifying goals and standards that they wanted for mastery. We had to even slim it down even more this year because with the shortened day, we just can't get every single thing in that we're usually used to getting in. So our teams worked really hard on identifying what are the most important things that our kids need to know to be able to move on. Growth in SEL, this is especially with the adults. We've spent a lot of time on the 5 competencies through the CASEL format. And just, I think all of our buildings are very similar. On that survey back in January, we asked what we need to focus on as a building. And everyone really felt like relationship building came out on top. And then for personal, it's just that self-management. When you're at home, a lot of us have noticed that we're working even more and longer just because it's always there. So just trying to get our teachers to say, you know what, close that computer, go do something for you is really something that we've talked about quite a bit. I think overall, this isn't just our building, improvement with remote learning. I look back to March where we were just getting started and people were just trying to figure it out. And now we're at the point where teachers are still changing classes to teach science and social studies and working together and even having 2 classes get together for activities. We have field trips, we have outside agencies coming in to provide those experiences for our kids, which we really weren't ready to do a year ago. So I just really think we've come a long way. Like the other buildings, we have some student clubs during the asynchronous time. We have anything from cooking club to Lego to kindness clubs to Spanish. There's just a lot of different activities for different student interests. And our staff really felt like this year we're actually thriving and we're not just surviving this year. We felt like last year was more just, we were in survival mode, just trying to make sure that the teachers knew what to do, the students were learning, but this year we really feel like that we've been able to take it to another level. I do have to recognize the entire staff at Ludwig for all of their hard work for the past year, whether they support students, they clean our buildings, they work in the office. Everyone has really, really worked hard and has just done an outstanding job. So kudos to the Ludwig staff, and I'm going to turn it over to Sue Forcash.
Thank you, Lisa. All right, I am so excited to talk about all the accomplishments at Oak Prairie from last year and this year, but I'm actually going to hand it over to Dr. Nyson, and he is going to go through some of our accomplishments from last year.
Thank you, Sue. Last year, as we all know, and we've kind of heard a little bit, just kind of when it hit the skids there in March, and when we discussed this with our 5 grade level teams, or actually not grade level, but our 5 different teams of teachers, they were so focused on 2021 because we've got it. We're in a groove now. Whereas they couldn't think of a lot of things from last year. So we started thinking about the end of the year. We focused on that. Obviously, there were some things we did throughout the year. We did complete our My Perspectives resource, EDLA adoption. I don't believe there's a student in our buildings that was a student when we adopted the last one. In fact, some of those students may have students that are now their children in our district. So it's an old adoption. So we were able to pull that off. We went through 2 different resources before that, but that's fully active in our classrooms right now. With Susan's help, and again, I look at this as June and July. Susan was here in June more than most people that worked here already, and she wasn't under contract. But June and July, that real shutdown there, we really started working on our PLCs and how that's gonna look in the future. Thinking we're not right there yet, but we started to look at those teams and what we had and what our resources we had already in place to try to get that process started, because we knew that in August, as much as we all wanted, we weren't going to be in person, and we were going to need to be able to hit the ground running, keep up where we were when we left off, but not only that, start flourishing moving forward. So one of the things they talked about in our teams was they quickly adapted to the e-learning and the collaborative technology resources. Greg has been awesome and his team. As well as I'm very happy with a lot of the choices we made for resources as far as what supports we've been getting from the outside. So it's money well spent. I haven't had anybody from any of the digital resources tell me I don't have time to talk. They've been very, very helpful. They'll talk directly to staff. And for those of you who are in middle management, it's hard to get somebody to talk to a staff member. They all want to filter everything through you, but they were very, very cooperative. Not only that, they were able to take these resources, our staff themselves, and make them their own, some ownership there. Susan went out towards the beginning of the year this year, but at the end of last year, we started pulling some new resources, different kinds of cameras, different kinds of things to get things rolling. We were able to provide student services, and this was a big one. We were so concerned because it was just like we ripped the Band-Aid off and they were gone. And some of those kids were getting a lot of social work services. Many of them are getting several hours a week, would ever be for speech or OT, but we were particularly worried about the kids who were getting social work services. So we reached out to them throughout the summer. We had a retiree who continued to work, it seemed like, past her retiree date. And we brought those students the services they need. We made sure they were tied up with people in the community for the resources that were available for their families. And we monitored them in a nice, friendly, more of a mentorship way. We didn't bug them and say, is everything all right? But we offered it up constantly. And the big thing, with the help of Ms. Swice, we were able to have a graduation at the end of the year. That didn't happen until July, but I'm going to call that a 1920 celebration. We did have a little bit of a picture taking thing. Again, Ms. Swice ran that. We had them out in front of the building, but we were able to pull it off, get the families out. Everybody showed up. This is the first time in the 13 years that I can remember, the last 13 years of being in the administration, that every kid showed up to graduation. And it's something sad, because it was a quick one. I mean, are we going to do it? Are we going to do it? And then we just went ahead, ripped the Band-Aid off and did it again, and just held the event. And it was very well run. And again, thanks to Susan, Ms. Swice, Mr. Murray came back. It was a very nice little event, and it gave some closure. And then our teams, we focused on 2021. This is about 1/8 of the list of the accomplishments that they were just so proud of. Some were specific and some were a little more global, but we kind of tried to put them together in a nice way. And I'll turn it over to Susan.
Thanks, Scott. Like Scott said, we met with all of our teams, and this list is tiny compared to what they all came up with. So it feels like we've accomplished quite a bit this year. Starting with prioritizing our standards and making sure that we really hone in on exactly what it is that we are working with our students with during the precious time that we have them, especially in person this year. And one of the things that we're very proud of is that we have maintained the rigor of instruction, and we've done that through identifying those standards. So we're also really proud of the relationships that we're working on building this year, continuing with our sixth graders, our seventh graders, our eighth graders, but also our incoming transfer students. So and we feel like we've worked really hard on our parent school partnership this year, because we've had to, our kids are home with their parents and guardians for half of the time. And so we really have to have strong school and parent connections. Another thing that we put in place this year that has been really successful is a mentorship program. We identified about 45 students from the student body that we felt like we really needed to give a little bit more support to. And our staff members stepped up, and each person took a student under their wing, and they've been working with them on a regular basis to try and support them this school year. We also listened to the community when they said they really wanted continuity with the learning platforms, and we have all become very consistent, and our teachers are amazing at using Google Classroom now. We've also done an awesome job of maintaining our clubs, our groups, and even adding interest groups during our 1 to 2 o'clock time. Students who are in good academic standing have the option to go to a ton of different interest groups, a lot of them that have been created by students, which I think is really great. So giving students ownership during that time. Also looking at trying to bring back athletics. We've maintained our band, our jazz band, our choir groups, our LMC activities. So our kids have a lot of things going on that they can still participate in, which I think is wonderful for them, even though it may be remotely. Also, we've continued to work on supporting social emotional growth and, incorporating CASEL in with the adult learners in our building. We've also seen that our students have really gained some autonomy with problem solving skills, with their communication skills, their advocacy, because they have to. They've learned this year at Oak Prairie, students never had emails before. So this year we got student emails, and kids have learned email etiquette. How do you email a teacher and ask for help? How do you email someone and advocate for yourself? So that's pretty great for them too. And then finally, in the curriculum realm, we have adopted the TCI resource in social studies, and it's going really well for our social studies teachers in the classroom. So lots and lots of things to celebrate at Oak Prairie. And then finally, we just wanted to share one quote with everybody. Let us remember, one book, one pen, one child, and one teacher can change the world, even in the remote setting or the hybrid setting or whatever setting we're in.
Thank you to our whole admin team. Great presentation. Nice to have those celebrations and accomplishments. 2 years worth, definitely. We're not even finished with this year. So back to the presentation as far as how this links into the strategic plan. And I think it's important to begin where we just left. And none of this means anything without the impact we're having with teachers and students. And so we have 5 goals from the strategic plan. They're color coded, as you'll see throughout. The simple way to think of these are student growth and achievement, learning culture, safe professional culture, partnerships, and resources. Now, each of those has 1 or 2 priority strategies that the strategic plan team developed around all their work that took the better part of last year. So for student growth and achievement, there's a strategy around aligned engaging curriculum, standards and data-based reporting. That's strategy 1 and 2. Strategy 3 is around social emotional learning under learning culture. Strategies 4 and 5 involve the professional culture and professional learning communities Strategies 6 and 7 are community outreach and then a communications plan. And then finally, strategy 8 is the long-term facilities plan. Now, can't work on all those at once. So what I've highlighted on this slide are the 6 strategies that we are actually having some action around during the 2021 school year. Over the course of the next 5 years, we'll work on every strategy, but we can't do everything at once. So the rest of this presentation is focused on the 6 strategies that you see highlighted here. And just another visual, it really gives you the same information, but you'll see how for goal 1, if you look at the strategy, you'll see the 2 strategies listed below. So for those of you who are more visual, this is how everything lines up. Please stop me if there's any questions. Student growth and achievement. This is our first goal area. I won't repeat the goal, but just as a reminder to the board, these were approved back in December of 2020. And what we're working on this year for the first strategy is really just to identify priority standards at all grade and subject areas. And that's something that we had a good head start on last year. Want to make sure those are in place as we move forward to next year. I've grayed out future years, but I do have them listed because we have an outline of what the next steps would be. But those are something that, although we have an outline, we reevaluate what needs to be done in each priority strategy every year. So it's too soon to commit to that. But by the end of this year, we'll commit to what work needs to be done for next year. And you'll see that pattern follow throughout. The other strategy for student growth and achievement around standards and data-based reporting system. Right now, this year is a gather and analyze data for identifying areas of strength and weaknesses with our assessment system and instructional strategies. Once again, you see some grayed out future priorities and how that would look that we'll walk into every year. We do have SMART goals on the radar. However, I'll show you in a minute why we are having some challenges because of COVID and just general changes they've had to the state test that are holding us back a little bit from making strong multi-year SMART goals for math and ELA. But right now we are planning on doing that once we have our FastBridge and state testing data back sometime, probably it says spring to fall 2021. It'd be late summer, fall before we believe we'll have all this information. Same thing for ELA. And then this is just what I was talking about, that based on the COVID pandemic, and this is really a baseline year where we're using some creatively some winter, spring data, and probably setting a new baseline I would anticipate for future years, but we'll have to wait and see. This is important. I know it's tempting to always say, well, there's a state test. You just need to line up to the state test and then do it. So what I've done in the next 2 slides is look at how the state has measured student growth and achievement in ELA and then in math. The red line indicates the state average every year. So once again, you can see that clearly D92 has historically always been above the state average, and we expect that to continue. The problem is when you look down at the yellow boxes for 2012 through 2014 and a number of years prior to that, we were under the ISAT. If you look in ISAT, we were always around that 88, 90% in D92. But then if you look at that dip in 2013 and 14, that's when the state just changed what was meeting and exceeding. They changed the measurement, the definition of that. So the whole state went down, and we did too. We stayed above average, but it's just one tweak by the state and everything kind of changes. Then when you look at the light gray for the first year of the park assessment, that was just a level setting year for the whole state. Those scores, for lack of a better word, didn't count, but they were using that to complete the statistics for the assessment. Then you can see the next 3 years, we were using park. And then once again, that got retired. And now 2019 was our first year of the Illinois Assessment of Readiness. You can see once again, we scored a 57, better than we ever did with park, but they're 2 totally different tests. They were supposed to be aligned. We were hoping to look at 2020's scores to see if that pattern was continuing. However, that was last spring and there was no 2020 assessment. 2021 is on right now. We are being told that will happen, although there is question about whether or not that will happen by the time the test actually comes. So this is the problem, and I'll show you this, essentially the same information with math, that we can't link all of our goals that we write to just one test like the state test. We want the accountability. We will continue to write goals for it, but we need some other goal areas around other data points closer to our D92 students. Science, once again, I didn't want to leave them out. There was the old science portion of the ISAT. You can see 3 years of that, and it was prior to that also. And they took a 2-year hiatus from that in 2015 and 2016. And we have been under the Illinois Science Assessment for the past 3 years. And once again, last year, that test did not happen. We'll see what happens this year. Any questions on that? It's just a call to make sure. Oh, I don't like seeing that. Okay. I don't know why this slide isn't rolling. We're gonna go back here and just see if we can't pull this up. This presentation is in the board book. So for the public and anyone else, we can certainly. Okay. Thanks for your patience. We'll go back to sharing. All else fails, go to a PDF. Okay. So last month we talked with the board about different peer groups. There's nothing that we're going to go into detail with this, but I want you to get an idea of how we could use different peer groups for a variety of assessments to really look at how we're doing in D92. So one example of this, and all 3 of these slides are looking at how we stack up to peer groups with the Illinois Assessment of Readiness in 2019. They're all ELA, so it's apples to apples. The only difference is who we're comparing to. This first slide, the red dot is D92. This is comparing to a peer group of all Will County elementary districts. And you can see the bottom axis is the percent of meets and exceeds. This gray line is average for all Will County districts. And then it also compares with per pupil spending. And then you can see, once again, the horizontal line is average for that axis. And so it's just a nice way to compare kind of where we're at, and you can look for areas that we're not quite where we want to be. I'll show you a different peer group. We can also look at the same information with our associated districts for the high school. And you can once again see that we are above average in our meets and exceeds. And then you can see where we are with operational expenses. Finally, this is a similar group to what I showed the board last month. Another way to look at that is to do a search for EAV, basically property value for the district, enrollment, and low income. So for example, this group came from similar EAV. Enrollment, I think it was as low as the mid 800s. We're about 1,500, and this group goes up to about 2,500 if I remember correctly. So you can see the different group. This group, if you look those districts up, they span multiple counties, but they're similar to us in those areas. Now there's other ways we could look at this. And once again, you can see how we're performing a little bit above average in both indicators. So I'm just showing this to the board, not for an analysis, but exposure to what we can do as we continue with continuous improvement and looking at how do we know how we're doing on behalf of our students. Once again, the downfall of this is this is all tied to the state assessments, and it's not good local data like common assessments. Any questions about the first goal area, which is student growth and achievement? Okay, learning culture is our second goal. This is the SEL goal everyone is familiar with. Once again, you can see that our priority has been highlighted for 2021. We do have a SMART goal This came from the district leadership team and the SEL task force. The SEL task force reviewed all the CASEL rubrics for each school. And then we created a district level goal of out of, I think there's 92 or 94 indicators or points possible. We want to see that increase by a total of 39 points for the district by June 2021. And if you look at this is what it would look like. Since the target is 39, we gave ourselves some grace period, some grace that we're going to say meets is 37 plus 2 minus 2, 37 or 41. So if we score 41, it's still a meet, even though our target was 39. 42 or higher, we're calling that exceeds. We exceeded our target by more than 2. And if we don't hit the target by more than 2, 36 or lower, we did not meet. The school targets are very important for the schools, less important for the board. The takeaway here is that we are focused on, as a board at this meeting, at the district numbers, but all the schools have their individual targets, and our success builds off, as a district, builds off of each school. Any questions about that? Okay. And then the next one is professional culture, priority strategy 4. We're not working on this year. It's not fair to say we're not working on it, because it is very much embedded with the one that we are working on, and that is PLCs. And so our priority is to incorporate some PLC structures into existing building leadership, school leadership, and the district leadership team, and to create a plan for including PLC time within the school day next year. So for this year, we do have an hour a week where we worked with the union last summer to have that be collaborative time for all the teachers at that grade level. We've been very loose about what happens during that time, and they've been taking advantage of that, I know, every week. Partnerships, once again, this has 2 strategies. Strategy 6, we're not particularly working on this year. Strategy 7 is getting a baseline of community, family satisfaction, and current opportunities for partnerships. We'll use 5 Essentials data, which is currently open, to gather that. Finally, resources, and you have an action item in the board book tonight. You've been hearing from Mr. Bullock about the tech plan, and now the facilities plan from Mr. Blatchley, and that is an action item tonight. But we do anticipate the facilities plan being in place by June this year, and then the tech plan will be started by June. It won't be finished, we know that. Okay, and then an action plan. The next step of anything like this is action planning. This will go back to the district leadership team, and we'll be working on the actual action plan, and that'll provide reports for future board meetings. PLCs is everything. So I'm going to take the next several slides to really talk about why we need PLCs and what they are. We are planning a March 1st institute for all staff to have a common understanding of PLCs. That is just under a year late, because we wanted to do that last March 13th of 2020. But we are also in March planning a parent university around PLCs. So this is a preview. So why do we need PLCs? If you're coming from a parent or student perspective, your why is this really focuses on the fact that each student matters. PLCs are focused on every single student. It focuses on the learning of each of those students, and it sets high expectations to be, for example, grade level or higher with those skills. This is what the teachers are focused on when they're working on PLCs. Why do teachers need PLCs? There's actually 2 slides for this. This came from teachers. We have a PLC steering committee, and they gave these responses. It is a focus on each, all, and every student. It improves professional practice. It's a way to implement change from within. It's a way to see students reach their potential. It's dedicated time to examine and collaborate about classroom practices. It provides the opportunity for cross-curricular connections in, for example, interdisciplinary units. Other reasons teachers say why we need PLCs: horizontal and vertical articulation. That means that across a grade level, we can be sure that all students are getting a guaranteed and viable curriculum, and then vertical articulation to make sure that second grade connects with third, which connects with fourth, which connects with fifth and sixth, and so on. Analyzing student assessment results. This is time to do that. Assessment development and refinement. That's creating those assessments that aren't fully in place yet, common local assessments. Those would be an important way to take the place or supplement the state testing. Job embedded professional learning for teachers. And then it's focused on research-based instructional practices. Why do principals want to see PLCs? Principals benefit from PLCs because it's a way for them to ensure learning for each student. It builds a collaborative, trusting school culture. It increases teacher efficacy and team efficacy. And efficacy is that idea that I or we can impact change in a positive way. Implementing a guaranteed and viable curriculum, that's assuring every parent that your student, your son or daughter, will be exposed to the right content, right curriculum, no matter who their teacher is at every grade level. Measuring leadership impact. So this is a way for principals to know what impact their leadership is having at their building on student achievement. And then to what extent our actions are connected to predicted results. So you'll see this more than once, but the idea that we can form a hypothesis, if we implement this instructional strategy, it will positively impact student achievement. And then to see that result is a pretty good continuous cycle of improvement. How about the superintendent and the board? Why do they care about PLCs? This did not come from board members, but I would respectfully suggest that board members benefit because, once again, a repeat, it ensures learning for each student. This is not just some students. This is each student. I can't say that enough. It is a way to measure leadership impact. When we say we're going to do something and it's going to have a positive outcome on student results, this is a way to do that. To what extent are our actions connected to predicted results, similar to principles? And from a board and superintendent perspective, it is your way to implement the strategic plan. It isn't just limited to PLCs, but it's a strong anchor for that. Any questions about the whys? PLCs we use as the abbreviation. I'm going to quickly go through each letter just for clarity. Professional, it's professional learning communities. Professional really gets you in the headspace of it's research driven, it's data driven, job embedded, common goals, and efficacy. The learning component, think of things like continuous cycles of inquiry, connecting teacher actions to student results, a growth mindset, focused risk taking. We want teachers to be innovative and have the support to go out there and take that risk that's based on some evidence, and then building shared knowledge about students, about their craft. Finally, the community part, collaborative culture. Teacher isolation is obsolete. We always work better in teams. So team efficacy and then collective responsibility. 3 big ideas. This is the quiz part. If by next year, we'd like everybody to know there's 3 big ideas of a PLC. It's focused on learning, collaboration, and results. Everything draws back to those. There's 4 questions that come to a PLC. First of all, what do we want students to know and learn? That's the curriculum. How do we know if students are learning? It's the assessment component. How will we respond when students don't learn? It's the intervention piece. And how will we extend learning for students who already are proficient? Enrichment. Okay. This is an important slide that talks about shifts. So everyone who's an adult can probably relate to this. If you're like me, the left-hand column is more like what I experienced going to school. And the right-hand column is what research says works for learning. So we need to shift away from a focus on teaching to a focus on learning. It's not about, well, I taught it. It's about, did the student learn it? It's an emphasis on what was, from an emphasis on what was taught to a fixation on what was learned. Doesn't matter if we taught it, it matters if the student learned it. From coverage of content to a demonstration of proficiency. Okay, I'm sure we're all in those classes where we just, the teacher covered the content. We don't do that in D92. This is about How do we get students to proficiency? Finally, from providing individual teachers with curriculum documents such as state standards and curriculum guides kind of handed down to them, to engaging our teams in building shared knowledge regarding essential curriculum. It doesn't mean that teachers have to write everything, but it means that they are very much involved in identifying the priorities. So if you're wondering why we need this PLC time, this is what happens, and this is how we do this work. It has to be embedded in a professional day. This is not something that can be added on after school or in the morning sometime or on the weekends. It has to be part of the professional day. It's dedicated time. It needs to be 60 minutes every week, 60 minutes at one setting. Can't have a lot of stops and starts. And we need feedback loops between the PLC team and the building principal. The building principal is not at all these meetings, but they are communicating about the meetings and being involved in that cycle. And then finally, it is a plan, do, study, act cycle, which I won't go into here unless there's questions. These are the things that if there's still people wondering, you know, what are those teachers doing during that PLC time? Why do we need 60 minutes a week? These are the only things that happen during PLC time. Curriculum study of knowledge and skills, designing common assessments. Remember, those are the alternative to state assessments. Designing effective instruction. That's how you get all the interventions in place. Analyzing data, strategies to remediate or enrich student learning, and then time to actually reflect on instructional practice. Any questions about that? Okay, in order for us to move forward with the strategic plan and implement PLCs, I have an outline of some things that need to happen first. I already mentioned the Teacher Institute. We are planning a parent university for March. We want our parents to know more than what I just shared about PLCs and why they're important. The district leadership team will present an action plan around what this would look like next year in either March or April, probably more like April. We'd ask the Board of Education to approve next year's calendar with a 1 hour each week time for PLC embedded in the school day. Now that's something that we also need to work with the union on, and we'll continue to kind of work with the board and the union on that to make sure it's solid. So that is a target for either March or April. We need the Board of Education, and this is not connected to PLCs, but for board conversation, you know, the strategic plan was designed to be from 2020 to 2025, a 5-year plan. That's very typical. I think we could argue that we haven't really had a first year of our plan. We've had parts of it, but certainly not a full year. So I'd recommend that as the board has turnover and we have the elections coming up in April, for the board to consider, once the new board members are on board, to really rename the strategic plan a 2021-26 document. And we don't have to. There's nothing wrong with keeping it the way it is, but it is a little bit of forward thinking, realizing that we've done some work, but let's not rush it all into 2025. Let's give ourselves a good 5 years to get this important work done. And then finally, we'll come back to the board for an implementation update in June. Any questions about that? Okay. And that is the state of the district in a nutshell, even if it didn't feel like a nutshell.
Very much. All right. Thank you to everyone, all your hard work on putting all that information together, and I look forward to seeing the action plan for PLCs in the next month or two. All right, okay. Assistant Superintendent for Business Services.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Dusterhoff. Just would like to start with the memo that's in the board packet this evening and cover just several topics. First off is our TRS Gemini new reporting system that's going to be required as of July 1st. As you can see in the memo, one of the reasons for this is that TRS is going to be offering a defined contribution plan for all of its members. In order for us to make TRS another vendor for us, I'll be bringing action next month for the board to actually make that happen. The other part with Gemini reporting for TRS is that we're going to have to start reporting pay period as opposed to what we have been doing. So that transition, it's underway right now. We're getting some help from our finance software, but that is a bit of a change for us. There are some salary studies that we're doing with ISB, the Illinois State Board of Ed. And these are yearly types of studies that we have to produce and send to Springfield. Last topic there is the summer 21 construction. I did go through a little bit of a explanation and backstory of what DLA has done for us in the past. DLA, our architect, they did a study for us back in 2011, which was really a great benchmark for us that I've used several times. The documentation in there is top notch. It's pictures. It's also forward-thinking sort of plans for what things we need to be addressing. So later on in the agenda, I'm going to be bringing forward a recommendation that goes along with what Dr. Arnold was talking about with our long-range plan, and that's utilizing DLA to produce the same sort of document they did for us almost 10 years ago, but this time a 5-year plan that would really reproduce sort of the focus that we need to have on our buildings. What are the hot topics that we need to address? What are areas of concern? And just so everybody knows, we've already went out to our staff, and we've had stakeholder meetings where we've had staff invited to come and meet with us so that we could get some feedback, what's happening truly at our schools. So that's ongoing as well. Also in the board packet, there is a presentation, and you might remember last year I brought forward a motion for us, a resolution to address our debt service extension base. So on our 2015 bonds, they're coming due in 2025. And so there's a tiny little gap that exists between what CPI is and what the debt service actually is. So because I levied last year for this, and so the board approved it, it's gone to the county clerk. A supplemental levy resolution like we did last year is not necessary this year or next year. Most likely I'll be coming back to the board though in 2022 to address it for the last couple of years. In that deck, in the PowerPoint presentation rather, you can see it's from PMA. If you do have access to that on slide 7, it sort of highlights just briefly a couple different columns, one being the bond series of 2015 and shows the payoff up until 2025. And then the other piece that I would just highlight just for everybody's reference is the remaining margin, which is the difference of why we did the resolution last year. Not really much more to go into about that presentation. There is the possibility for us to restructure some debt, and that's part of what that presentation is talking about. Obviously, no action required, but this is something I think for the board to consider as based on market conditions, and we do have the opportunity to restructure that if the board so chooses. I'm happy to answer any questions. Otherwise, that wraps up my presentation.
All right, thank you. Director of Student Services.
Good evening, thank you. I'm very excited to be talking about summer after the day and the past couple of weeks of shoveling. We're excited to start talking about our summer programming. You'll see your 2 board memos from myself for special ed and one from Jamie for curriculum. They're really mirrored images. We're working together on what we're going to do for this summer. So I think we'll just go ahead and jump down to the presentation and go from there. And I think you're projecting the presentation, or am I sharing my screen?
Tell me again, is it in there?
Yes. Yeah, it's in there. I just didn't know if you wanted to slide or if you want me to share my screen.
If you have it handy, I will give you the ability to share.
That's fine. Don't mind my desktop.
It's all yours.
Thanks. All right. So. Oh, So hopefully you should be able to see the slides now. Okay, good enough. So we're going to go through and I'm going to explain a little bit more on the special ed side, but the biggest part we want to work on is that Jamie and I have been working together on what all students need. And you're going to see that linked into the strategic plan as well, as far as working on MTSS. So this is something we're very excited to go through. So our summer program this year is called What I Need or WIN. And although we've had a lot of challenges this year, we're really looking at that growth mindset and keeping that in mind. Our students and staff have done a fantastic job over the last year or so with COVID, but we really want to look at those students who are struggling and not making that growth that we expect of them. So we are going to be looking at the required program for special ed, which you're more accustomed to. The board has seen special ed summer school going for a long time, but we're looking at doing a combined program for students at risk identified. You'll see the criteria here shortly, and then maintaining for our students in special ed. We're going to be focusing on ELA and mathematics, and then there'll be a grade level criteria for our case 8 students as well as our IEP students as identified on their IEPs. And then the goals of our summer, oh, sorry, Jamie can take it away. Go ahead.
You do it. Alrighty, so the goals of our summer WIN program are to accelerate instruction, not to go faster, but just to continue what we've been doing through the school year. So continuation of our prior year school year instruction, so just to keep going. We're going to maintain our social emotional connections, so part of our CASEL, our SEL goals of the year. And our main focus is to bridge those learning gaps that we've experienced during the pandemic. We're going to be focusing on student successes in the upcoming school year. And we're going to provide learning activities aligned to the upcoming grade level standards to set students up for success. And each child will be exposed to grade appropriate learning materials. And we will be aligning our curriculum vertically and horizontally to make sure those things are all met. In order for the students to be attending the summer program for both ESY and our regular students, we're going to be looking at a few different data points. The first one would be our FastBridge benchmark data, which we're just finishing up now. So as we start assimilating that data, we'll be looking at those students that would fall into the lower tier 3 of those tests, and we'll be determining the most needy students there. We'll also be looking at classroom and common assessments and students that have received incomplete or failing grades, and of course, teacher recommendations. And for our ESY students, we'll be looking at their IEPs to see which students are eligible for those services in the summer.
Great. And then our format's going to look a little different. I think for the community, this will be a bigger change for our IEP students. They're used to pretty much starting after that last week of school in June, last full week of our calendar year, and then we're usually done by 4th of July. So what we're looking at for the WIN program will be June 14th to July 1st. We'll run 8 to 11, Monday through Thursday without any Fridays. We are expecting that parents who are, if your child is selected, it will be mandatory attendance. We do want to have students here and transportation would be provided. On the right side, you can see for extended school year, those IEP students will be here for that June to July, but we're really excited to be expanding it into August. So we would have kind of a jump start from August 2nd to August 12th for those IEP services to continue, whether they're getting speech, OT related services, but also focusing on that academic reading and math. And obviously we would want their attendance to be mandatory as well, and transportation will be provided. Because we're doing both gen ed students and special ed, if a child rides this gen ed bus during the school year, they'd be able to ride the gen ed bus in that June section. We wouldn't be running special ed routes as much as we would historically. And then our staffing piece, obviously we'll need teachers in all those categories. We've already sent out a survey. We have about 56 staff who've identified that they would be interested in working, and we broke down their availability by months and grade levels and service provided. And then we are sending out another Google form tomorrow once we know where we're going with this to see who's definitely available so we can start posting those positions and getting them filled. We'll need gen ed teachers, special ed teachers, our related service staff, our paraprofessionals are invaluable in this type of programming. And then we will have a summer site principal. Ms. McCluskey and I did think we would be able to run that, but then we forgot we also have our jobs to do. So we're excited to look at that option. And then the professional learning for staff will be doing some curriculum specific training. We're doing some pilots with, especially with reading interventions. We have some gaps for our special needs students, and we're going to try and work on those this quarter towards the end of the year. run them in the summer, and then we'll have a better understanding what students need and hit the ground running in the fall. And then we'll be incorporating that into their schedules.
Okay. So this summer in our WIN program, we're going to be focusing on ELA, English Language Arts, math, and of course our SEL, which will be embedded into the curriculum. And we're going to be looking at the resources that we already have in place. We'll use our math programs that we have in place, Bridges and Big Ideas. In the lower grades, we'll be continuing with Learning A to Z and Fundamentals. And then the upper grades will be looking at continuing on with units in our My Perspectives in the ELA, and also pulling in other resources, fiction, nonfiction, that type of thing. And as we spoke of earlier, it's really just a continuation of our school year. So it's not going to be anything different that the students will be exposed to, but just to keep going. This so that we could look at those standards that maybe weren't addressed during the pandemic, or things that we need to focus on a little bit more to get them ready for the next grade level. And as you can see here, we have a lot of resources in our district, which is so great. We're so fortunate for that. But we also are going to be pulling our best resources to make sure we meet those needs of those students. And we'll be addressing the CASEL 5 competencies along with our second step program as we embed those into the ELA and mathematics. And also the students will be provided with their iPads and any other assistive technology as needed. And since this is the first time that we're developing the summer school program available for all students that are in need, we're really looking at aligning the Illinois priority standards and really looking to vertically align those with the upcoming school year and the upcoming grade level and the grade level before. And what we're looking at doing is just to do just-in-time instruction, which is the scaffold instruction, and to provide those pieces of differentiation for the students as they go along. We'll be progress monitoring and taking anecdotal records. We also want to develop a progress report so we could look at successes and we could show growth and we could show how we did over the summer. And we really want to kind of start looking at our standards-based grading, and this might be a good opportunity to develop that over the summer. Ideally, Dr. Arnold and I have spoken about, coming up with a model intervention program for our district, and this could be a way for us to start implementing some of those ideas.
And then the IEP students' progress report would be similar to what they've had. They'll have their IEP goals and objectives like they've always had, reporting their progress in that quarter. So excited to do it. And happy to answer any questions.
All right. Thank you.
Appreciate it.
So, Jimmy, do you have anything else? This is pretty rare.
We're finished. Thank you.
All right, Director of Technology.
There you go, Greg. You got everybody set up and we didn't make you a panelist.
Hi, everybody. I have a few short updates. Since my last update in January, the Technology Task Force has continued to meet. We did have 2 additional meetings. At the January 14th meeting, we listened to task force members presenting their recommendations that they had arrived at from building discussions. And out of those recommendations, additional questions and needed to be asked. So we had some follow-up meetings. Principals facilitated some additional discussions with their grade level teams. I had several conversations with administrators and board members and teachers, and came to the conclusion, which was expressed or communicated at the 4th meeting, which was on February 10th and 11th, that we needed some additional time, and we needed to collect some additional information before I could present a recommendation to the board. So in lieu of all that, I will be working on, planning next steps and coming up with a timeline. Additionally, we continue to work on our SOPA compliance. I believe I mentioned in our last update that we were looking at using Catch-On to collect some analytics in terms of what systems and applications that are being used. As of last week, we had come up with roughly about 900 applications that have been in use since January 13th. Combining those 900 applications with some of the apps that we are using on the iPads, we have about 1,300 or so that we will be evaluating to determine if there's student data being used, and then following up on that to have that be in compliance with SOPA. And lastly, we continue to work on our security awareness with staff. Our next quarterly test will be done within the next 30 to 45 days. And as a suggestion that came out of the last board meeting, the technology team will be looking at putting together some materials for our staff to help with email safety. We hope to have that out to staff by the spring, if not earlier. So be happy to answer any questions that you guys might have.
Did the number of applications that came back from Catch-On, was that a surprise in the number?
Honestly, Matt, I don't think it was altogether too surprising. I know there probably will be a lot of crossover between Catch-On and the apps that we're already deploying through our MDM. So at this point, you know, we're kind of, how would I say, just kind of putting together a big list of things, and then we'll be digging into it. So no, not altogether too surprising.
All right. It seemed like a daunting task when I saw the number.
Yes, we will be busy with that, definitely.
All right. Any other questions? All right, thank you. All right, I need a motion to approve the consent agenda as presented. Oh, sorry, the consent agenda items are routine items that are moved on in one motion. The following items are contained in the consent agenda this month. Meeting minutes from the regular meeting of January 19th, 2021. Our treasurer's report and financial reports, monthly expenditures, the personnel report, board policy updates and review, second reading approvals, preparation for the annual budget, and the annual administrative benefit plan. Do I have a motion?
Okay. Gorecki, second.
All right. Any questions? Any? All right.
I just noticed the there's a higher than normal number of retirements. Seemed like a lengthy list. I'm just curious if that was if there's a driver behind that, if something we need to worry about. Backfilling all those roles. It's a lot of roles to backfill. It's a lot of talent. Leaving the district for retirement, obviously, which is usually great news for them. But just struck me as a larger than normal amount.
I don't know that that's a larger than normal amount. That's really driven by people's birthdays and years of service. And March is the deadline for the contract. So February is the time to get all those in. And to be clear to the public, those aren't all happening at the end of this year. Those are rolled out over the next several years. But by the teacher's contract, there are some enhancements that they receive if they give us a 3 years notice. So I think it's fairly typical. And then looking ahead at who's actually retiring year to year, I agree wholeheartedly. Any of these individuals going will be a loss at that time. We've got some time to plan for a succession plan.
Okay. Yeah, the February date makes sense then, considering I didn't realize we had that March
they all came
deadline.
In.
Yeah.
March 1st.
I get nervous when I see that many people, putting in paperwork.
Yeah. It's kind of that cycle of the school year.
Yep. Makes sense.
All right, roll call, please.
Middleton,
Yes.
Gurecki,
Yes.
Houlihan,
Yes.
Adamchuk,
Yes.
Sweiss, Furkeluk,
Yes.
Dusterhoff.
Yes, motion carries. I need a motion to approve the memorandum of understanding for DLA Architects for a 5-year master plan.
Houlihan.
Middleton.
All right,
All right, so just reminding everybody sort of what I was discussing earlier. This is a 5-year plan, similar to what DLA has done for us in the past. But it's really, so much has changed on our mechanical, electrical, plumbing side, air handling side, since they did that work 10 years ago, that it's really a different environment right now. So right now, this focus is going to be a little bit different, but yet we still need this moving forward. So this is forward thinking, this is forward looking for us. And that's really the idea behind the MOU.
okay. Any questions? Roll call, please.
Sweiss, Furkeluk,
Yes.
Adamchuk,
Yes.
Middleton,
Yes.
Houlihan,
Yes.
Gurecki,
Yes.
Dusterhoff.
Yes, motion carries. I need a motion to approve the student registration fees.
Middleton.
Dusterhoff, second. Dr. Arnold, real quickly, you wanna?
This is an extension of what the board took as a 1-year action last spring. And Mr. Blatchley has looked at the numbers, and we are confident that this is something that we can maintain in the budget moving forward. So we do see this as a benefit to our families and kind of levels the playing field for everyone.
Just to be clear, it's the removal of the registration fees for our families. Not actual fees. Any questions? Roll call, please.
Gurecki,
Yes.
Adamchuk,
Yes.
Sweiss, Middleton,
Yes.
Houlihan,
Yes.
Furkeluk,
Yes.
Dusterhoff.
Yes. Motion carries. Need a motion to approve the 6th bank leave.
I'll make that motion, Gurecki.
Houlihan will second it.
All right,
And this is something that unfortunately, from time to time, a union member asked to put in place. This is targeted at a specific union member due to a health situation, and it gives D92 staff the ability to donate a sick day or two to the bank for this individual should they need it. And we have worked with the union to put a process in place for not only gathering those sick leave days, but also using them, and then any unused days being given back to the individuals who donated in a process at the end of the year. So we do see this as an advantage. This is something we have to do, and of course we would do in conjunction with the union. And so it would require both union and board support, and the union does support this.
Hey, Tim, sorry, and we don't have to belabor the point. I don't know, it doesn't sit well with me that this has to happen, meaning that we have to take sick days from people to support one of our teachers. Is there no other process that we can get the staff member the days that they need without having to take them, donate from other people? It feels dystopian. Maybe it's law, maybe it's rule, and that's fine, but I'm just curious if there's any other way to do it.
No, is your short answer. TRS does govern the use and school code of sick days for employees, and this is very allowable, but this is outside the contract, and so that's why we need there is no provision in the contract for this. So this is why we need this separate MOU, but there is no other mechanism to do this. Teachers by contract have so many days of sick days. When those are exhausted, this is a process. This is very common in school districts, not necessarily the one-offs, but having a concept like a sick leave bank. And it is 100% optional. No one has to donate.
Sure. No, and I think it's great that our staff can do this for one another. Just was hoping there was a different way to get it done, but I appreciate the background on it.
All right, roll call, please.
Adamchek,
Yes.
Sweiss, Furkala,
Yes.
Gurecki,
Yes.
Middleton,
Yes.
Houlihan,
Yes.
Dusterhoff.
Yes. The motion carries. All right, discussion items, district leadership team.
District leadership team, I really covered the content in the presentation. I don't know if the board members who are members of the district leadership team want to give an update. I'd just like to have a place on that whenever there is a meeting to report on. Our next meeting is coming up next week, I believe. Okay,
All right.
I got some thumbs up, so we're good.
All right. Staffing needs for 21-22.
Really, this is just the first draft that the board will see. There'll be at least one more for the board to approve. We may bring back another draft. It's still to be determined, but it's a lot of trying to predict what next year will look like. But the biggest change you'll see is from 2021, the number of staff that we hired due to COVID and teachers, and then kind of going back to what we anticipate being a typical start of the school year next year. So I'd be happy to entertain any questions about the document that's in the board book. It is in draft form.
All right. And the school calendar draft for 21-22.
So this is directly linked to the PLC work. And what you see are really two different ways to bring PLC work into the school calendar. And like I said in the presentation, I think we can make either way work, whether it's a SIP day approach for 1 year and then moving to a 1 hour embedded in the teacher day process, or just going to the 1 hour I'm sorry, not per day, per week in the upcoming school year. 2021-22 school year was the target that came out of strategic planning. This year was supposed to be a year of learning, and then next year was supposed to be getting that in there. So we're really in a weird spot. We could go either way, but I am recommending that we move forward with that time, which would get you to draft 1 of the calendars. The other 2 calendars have SIP days included. They aren't as effective for implementing a PLC model, but it does give a larger chunk of time for some professional development throughout the year. It would just be a little bit, it would be less effective in that year. Teachers would not have that weekly time. So I'd be happy to discuss the pros and cons of either of those. And what we're not talking about is, what I haven't mentioned, I made this all about PLCs. Everything else in the calendar is consistent across all 3 drafts. Unfortunately, due to COVID, we did not have a calendar committee, but each school leadership team met and gave some input on where they'd like to see parent-teacher conferences, things like that. We do, as you know, always mirror spring break with the high school. We're very close to this high school's start date. Our teachers tend to like starting midweek, and so our calendar reflects that. So we do deviate a little bit with the high school there. And then the other one that's a deviation is winter break. I think we only deviate by maybe a day. The high school always has finals to worry about, which we don't have to plan around. So I do believe this is a good draft based on teacher input, but certainly based on board or additional teacher input, we can tweak things.
And when you anticipate us needing to
Well,
approve it.
once again, the PLC part is the more difficult piece. So the structure of the calendar, I don't see changing much other than whether we put those PLCs in once a week, which would be draft 1, or not, which would be either draft 2 or draft 3. My recommendation today is to go with draft 1 and put that hour in for next year once a week. Now, the question would be, and I think Board Member Swice actually asked at the last meeting, which day and what time? Would this be a late start or early dismissal? This does impact our families. And so I think that question, very narrow question, should go to parents. I do believe that if the board is generally supportive of the hour, I'd like to go out to parents and survey them. I'd like to survey teachers. But to be honest, this really does, is it a late start or early dismissal, impacts parents more because of the childcare issues that surround it. So because of that, I think parents definitely need a say in this. So with the board's permission, that would be the plan, is to go out. If draft 1 is what we're looking to move forward with, then I'd want to get some parent input. That would happen after the parent university in March. We want them to know more about the PLC model before asking for input on that.
Okay.
So March or April is your easy answer to your question.
So you would say that we could approve the hour to be determined after parental and
Yep.
and you and the staff would decide where that went. Okay.
Yeah, so far, I'd like to, once again, this is the most serious we've been talking at the board level about this. With no other board concerns, I would move forward, once again, going back to the union, making sure we're all on the same page with once a week and the hour, have the parent university prior to our March board meeting. And I would push hard to try to bring a final draft back to the board, but you could definitely approve the calendar with the day of the late start or early dismissal to be determined.
Which side? Okay.
Yeah.
Perfect. Okay.
Any
Hey,
other
Tim,
questions?
the one other thing I noticed, sorry, on the calendar, and it's a minor thing, I don't think we had to dive in it here, but I noticed we still were structuring in the 5 snow days towards the end of the year. Today was obviously a snow, a real old school, as you called it in your voicemail, an old school snow day, which I think was great. Honestly, just to kind of get, kind of go back to something that felt a little bit normal. But we are good at remote learning now, right? Do we expect to have a mixed bag, next year of some remote days, some snow days? Do you anticipate us having a policy of kind of always trying remote first, and then if we can't do snow, or what's the driving factor that will make us help you determine whether or not it's a full-on old school snow day or a remote day?
Fair enough. And we do, you're right. We need a board conversation about this. I wanted to try what we did today to get some teacher response. So what I'm going to give you is my opinion, thought, process currently, knowing that I'm very much open to listening to parents and teachers and board members about could this work. So here's what I'm thinking. I think there is some value in what we had today. Traditional, no school, we're going to add it on to the end of the year for something like what happened today, a snow day. Now, another factor, no decision we make is in isolation. So the fact that we've been through a year of screen time and remote learning, a day of not having that today, I think was a welcomed change. If next year there's a day where the power's out across the district and we have to send kids back home, though I don't know how that would work if we were doing remote, but some other a water main break, and we have to close down a school or two or something like that, you would see those being potentially remote days. You could see, remember the old polar vortex where we would call ahead, this was rare, but we'd say for the next 2 or 3 days, we were going to close school. In a situation like that, that wouldn't make sense to have a snow day because without remote learning, because kids can't go outside and play. They're stuck in the house. So I could make an argument for making a hybrid model. I don't know if there is a willingness for a hybrid model. So I think at a future time, we would want to have a good, robust conversation with the board, get some parent input, get some teacher input on, or do we want a hybrid model? To continue after this year with any type of remote learning, we would have to redo our e-learning plan that we put together last April for the ROE. So we would have to have this, there will be a time for this discussion in the future.
Sure.
Good point.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Yeah, and I think today was a great example. It was already on a long weekend. And it was a little bit of a surprise, I thought. I was not, Thursday and Friday, I was not expecting this. And so teachers didn't have even the chance to prepare like they did when we had one, I don't even know what, 2 weeks ago?
Tuesday, yeah, a couple Tuesdays ago.
Ago. So yeah, I thought this was certainly the right call for this particular day.
But to your point on that one, we were able to tell teachers and students the day before, take things home. They had time to prepare. This was a 3-day weekend. To have remote learning would have required teachers yesterday to stop what they're doing, scramble, and try to put together remote learning activities today without knowing if all their materials they would have it if they took it home on Friday. Because to your point, it wasn't anticipated. So.
Right. And not giving up an in-day school day. Right. Yeah. When we have 176 in-person school days, giving up one to be remote is more palatable. Today, I thought, why would we give up an in-person day to go remote again? So, all right. Old business, the feasibility study.
Well, so the board has received the presentation back in January. Had a little bit of time to talk about it. I think the next step for the board is to really, I don't know if this is I guess it's a decision on, is this something that we put on the shelf for now and wait and see if it's needed in the future? We have, as I alluded to earlier, a new board coming on in April. This isn't something that I get a sense that the board is trying to push hard on. We got the information, we can receive it, and we can just let it exist until some future date when we want to revisit it or not. So it's really, I'm looking for board direction on what, if anything, to do with the feasibility study.
Well, I think, in my opinion, we missed a window of opportunity, and because of that, D91 has contracted with a new superintendent. We really need to allow that process to evolve, in my opinion, and let them. I mean, sure, you can break contracts, but you know, in my business opinion, it's bad form. You hire somebody on and then say, yeah, but don't get comfortable. You know, again, that opportunity, it's still going to be there. We have better information now. I think more importantly, we have a lot more questions. You know, we've got the report. We can dig into some of those variables that we really didn't understand before. And yeah, I think it can be a discussion that's brought up with the new board. But at this point, I would say for myself personally, I would just table this and say, let's revisit it at some future date.
All right. Not hearing any other discussion, I agree. So we will remove that future agendas and revisit it at some future date. New business, grading scale, grades 6 through 8.
Turn this over to, is Mrs. Forecash talking with you, or is this just Mrs. McCluskey?
Just me, I think.
Okay.
All right, good evening. During the pandemic and during hybrid and remote learning, grading has become an issue for many teachers and many students. Oak Prairie right now is in the discussion process of piloting a new grading scale, a more traditional grading scale that would help students and help teachers better assess where the students are at. It would be more equitable And, it'll be a way to enhance student engagement and give more accurate feedback. Instead of grading on compliance, it'd be grading more on the content, what the students know and what they have learned. Also, it would be a vertical alignment with the high school, and it'd be your traditional grading scale. It is in the packet if you needed to compare both versions. A D would be 60%, 60%, D minus, C would be 70%, the traditional grading scale that we all know. The grading scale right now is making it difficult for those students that are falling behind and are disengaged to try to catch up. It's becoming a little bit more difficult. So they would like to pilot the traditional grading scale between February 17th and the next board meeting on March 16th. And then we would present the results back to the Board of Education at that point.
Would that also include a policy about missing work and whether missing work is graded as a 0 versus a percentage grade when things aren't turned in? I know the high school has moved to a 45% for a grade for any missing work. Is that something that's also being considered?
Yes, that is all part of the consideration. The good thing about the pandemic, it has really changed our focus on how we're grading things. And I think it will be a positive in the long run. And it's just something to look at going forward. Instead of the students struggling and the teachers struggling to try to get everyone caught up, it would be a new way for us to look at grading. And hopefully we could get to standards-based grading or to that mindset at least. So it's a conversation that's going to be ongoing. And it has really opened up a lot of collaboration between the teachers and the administration about grading practices.
Yeah, I guess I want to clarify, and Grant, and I share your concern. We've talked about that. When this was first brought to me, my preference would be to tackle this very holistically. This is a little part, something that needs to be addressed of a bigger conversation around how do we communicate learning? What is learning? How do we grade to communicate? What's the purpose of all that? I think you bring up a really good point. The impact of a 0 is very significant mathematically. You can see what that does, and I'm aware of what the high school has done. Are we asking, and I guess that I'm recommending that based on what you said, we ask the junior high to consider bringing, that's not currently a part of that, is it? Of the proposal?
I don't think so, but we could.
I guess I would
discuss it
ask,
further.
based on that, if we could bring that back to the junior high staff, because this is something they really want. This was not something they were willing to wait till the end. Well,
No, right.
they
They
weren't
to get going
willing
on
to
this.
wait to the end of the year, but this is something that was important enough to bring to the board now. Timing of this, the board could formally approve it. They'd like to pilot it right now. And then as long as that goes well, come back and say, yep, this went well, and have the board approve that in time, just in time for the third quarter grades, which are right after the next board meeting. So I guess all I'd ask is if the junior high could address that question around zeros.
Yeah, the zeros has been a discussion at the junior high. I know Mrs. Forecast has worked with several staff members there, explaining what a 0 does to the student, how difficult it is to come out of that hole. And so their grading practices are changing as we're going along. And so that has been part of the discussion. So I'm sure it'll be something that could be improved upon. For
We
sure.
have some resources at the high school that we could reach out to. I'm sure there's a couple staff members who really were involved with that maybe we could get some of their insights too.
And it'd be great to have that vertical articulation with the high school as well.
I would just, not that I want to, dominate the conversation here, but my only caution would be I wouldn't want you to marry the two, because I know that the discussion of the 0 and the 45% is a very polarizing and difficult discussion, and it's something that needs to change. A lot of mindsets and a lot of fundamental background of teaching in what teachers have done for a very long time. Whereas I think the grading scale, the 90, 80, 70, 60 is a long time coming for Oak Prairie. So I would just say, again, my own personal opinion, we don't want to marry that, power of a 0 conversation to the transformation of the standardized grading schedule. But I do think that it's worth discussion to, just continue to review and go from there. That's just my perspective.
Very good. Thank you.
If we don't marry them, could we at least date and look at getting engaged or something. I think we'll see where we go with that. Because I hear you, Grant. We're not trying to force anything down. We're really responding to teacher requests. Piggybacking off of that, we did check with K-5 to see if they were looking at any change like this. They're interested, but not until next year. So this is a step down a road of how do we assess, what do grades mean, conversation, maybe a little bit longer term. So, thank you.
Jake, did you have anything? I saw you on mute.
Yeah, no, I think I aligned with where Grant was going, right? If we try to marry these two together, we might end up killing the whole thing for trying to get this zero thing across, because that feels, and I don't know that this is right, but that I don't know where this starts to kind of encroach on some of the teacher freedoms and the ability for them to choose how they want to teach their class, right? Because right now it is a mixed bag. You have teachers who do zeros and teachers who don't, right? We don't have a formal policy. So and the other thing I was thinking about is if we implement this and we put the grade scale in now, are we moving the finish line in the middle of the race versus implementing something next year where everybody knows what the finish line looks like?
Yeah, this is something that the teachers at Oak Prairie have pushed hard for. They really do want to see this happen, is my understanding. And I don't think that we have any concerns about this happening with the timing. I think we're all comfortable with that, but we can double check with Ms. Forecast and the teachers and just make sure they feel good about that.
Sure.
But I'm confident right now that they do. Now, this is definitely not an administrative initiative. This is something that teachers brought forward.
Yeah.
It was part of the leadership team at Oak Prairie that brought it to administration.
team.
They were really,
No, again, yeah, if teachers support it, then obviously that makes sense. I want to make sure that they have the academic freedom to, teach administer their classes how they want to versus having something kind of placed on them. And it sounds like that's not the case here. So that's good.
And I applaud rolling with it now. I understand the idea that you're changing the system midway, but by being less punitive, we're not changing it to penalize students. This will actually boost students' ability to be successful through things like you talked about, being less about compliance and more about learning. And so that's really exciting that that's coming from the staff.
yes.
That they're bringing that forward, because those are, like Grant said, those are very difficult conversations. So that's great that they're leading on that. So,
Thank you.
all right. Information on, did we have a FOIL?
There was one.
There was one.
Two.
Maybe two. Yeah.
Okay, and then student conduct. Yeah. Okay. There were no communications, were there? I didn't have any.
I don't believe so.
No, there were nothing, no.
In closed session, the board can go into closed session for the following reasons: collective negotiations, matters between the school board and its employees or their representatives. Yeah. Or deliberations concerning salary schedules for one or more classes of employees, and litigation when the action against, affecting, or on behalf of the school board has been filed and is pending before a court or administrative tribunal, or when the school board finds that an action is probable or imminent, in which case the basis for the finding shall be recorded and entered into the minutes of the closed meeting. Do I have a motion to go into closed session?
Houlihan,
Middleton.
Roll call.
Swice. Houlihan.
yes.
Gurecki.
Yes.
Middleton.
Yes.
Perkala.
Yes.
Adamchuk.
Yes.
Westerhoff.
Yes, motion carries. We're in closed session. For the public, you can stay in this meeting. The board is going to go into a different meeting and come back to this meeting when we are back in open session.
I'll have to close this meeting only because
Oh,
I have to open
sorry.
the other one. So we'll close, but the same meeting, the same length will open again when we're finished. Do you want, the only action item we would have is to approve the minutes from closed session.
And there will be no action items after closed session other than to approve the minutes of closed session, which is really kind of exciting. Okay,
All right,
thank you.
thank you. Board members, you should have the link to the other board meet, to the closed session meeting.
Have a good night. Stay warm. See you
Hey,
tomorrow.
I need a motion to approve closed session minutes as written in closed session.
Motion, Jake.
Second. Roll call, please.
Can't hear.
You guys are all muted.
Speak in the microphone, try again.
Not hearing anything.
Middleton,
Jim's on mute. He's got to
Can you-
unmute.
yeah, it shouldn't matter though. Can you hear me?
Yep.
We can hear you by Tim, but not whoever's talking.
Okay.
Hear
so
Matt or Jim.
Middleton,
Yep.
Adam Check,
Yes.
Dusterhoff,
Yes,
Ferkelek.
Yep.
Did I miss anybody?
No.
Okay.
motion carries. I need a motion to adjourn the meeting.
I'll make it.
Adam, check.
Jake is
I'll-
first.
And
Tom.
Tom second.
all those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Have it.
Thanks, guys. Supposed to rain on Sunday. How about that?
Jesus.
Great.
We'll melt some of this damn snow.
It'll be a big slosh pile. All right. See you guys.
Good night.
Good night.